This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
My name's Madge and I'm from UE, and I want to thank again Miranda and Michael for deciding to locate this present workshop in Bristol. So I think it's great that you have come together with us to do this event. And I just thought most conferences are either good for the papers or the networking, but I think this is good for both because we've brought together people from a wide array of specialisms, interests, and expertise, getting them to talk to one another. And but also the quality of the papers was uniformly stimulating and provocative, and really interesting. So I've had a good day, and I hope you have too. I've taken notes, but I'm not going to talk at great length because I think we're going to listen to what the panel has to say. But a couple points perhaps I would like to make, and I'm at the age now where I have to sort of look through glasses and then look at you without my glasses. I don't have varifocals, so you'll have to just bear with me. Sorry, let me just get my notes. I thought one of the exciting things was the sort of range of topics, and one of the themes that emerged from me was something that echoes something Michael said to me about, well, to you academic historians, history is a critical discipline, but to many people it's a visceral, important constituent of their identity. And I think that's probably true of history in general, but I think it's particularly true with hidden histories and histories particularly of Black history. And the whole, I just launched a book of my own on women's history in Bristol, another hidden history, if you like. And there are two things that emerged from the papers that remind me of my own recent project. And that is, one, the tension between hidden from history, the people who were important in their day or fated in their day, like the Black, John Blank, et cetera, who then get forgotten in the archive. And then the fact that there is also a gendered approach to, approach that looks at ethnicity or race as a filter through which to analyze the power within a particular society. So the tension is that if you only excavate those who have been in the public domain, who say are Black, you will find a limited number because of the power structure has constrained the number of people who could participate in the public arena. So you're kind of stymied. But if you then say, well, let's look at race or class as a delineator of power, you can lose the individual stories. You can lose the visceral activism and the importance that captures people's imagination, particularly young people today, and it becomes a kind of a more academic and abstract exercise. So we have to keep that tension in mind. But when I was at the launching of the women's book, I bumped into, they had many stalls at the M Shed and at International Women's Day, and one of them was a young women's project. And I was talking to the person there, and I said, what do you do? She says, well, we've taken focus groups and surveys to look at what concerns young women today. And I said, well, what is the major concern? She says, what's really emerged as a major concern for young women is mental health and the questions of depression and anxiety. And that's something that echoed in my own experience as a tutor, that something is happening here, perhaps because of the technological revolution or the pressures of daily life. And the importance of history as a means, and looking at the archive as a means of healing, I thought was a really inspirational theme. And I thought that Abira and Heather's papers were just so interesting in that respect, and I think inspirational. I guess the tension that was echoed also with the work that Hannah and Naya are doing with young people is to what in this tension between wanting to provide positive role models in the public realm in history. History is a healing, therapeutic activity, and the demands of the discipline as a critical narrative. The historians do it with evidence. They do it with nuance. They embrace uncomfortable contradictions and truths, and to what extent that can always be translated into work in the popular arena is a difficult one. And I think that's something that we all have to grapple with. It's not a given. It's something we always must be aware of. I loved the interaction between art and history that Michael talked about, the way that the reinterpretation of the Black Trumpeter in the modern context was just such a creative and playful way of using history as a jumping off vehicle for creativity. And I think that's something that emerged also with Sean's, the projects in which Sean was engaged. And so well, it was interesting to listen to what Valda had to say and watch her film. I was just completely bowled over by the stunning beauty of the images. And I wasn't sure why, Valda, you didn't describe yourself as a sculptor as well as a painter. And I thought that was interesting. I thought maybe there's a gender thing, but it was interesting to hear about the process that you use to use your sculptures as a jumping off point for your paintings. But I just thought the interaction between the way your art expresses a lot of unspoken narratives and your comments about how memory sometimes is just too painful to be expressed and perhaps can be destructive if we memorialize certain aspects of history and they become self-fulfilling negative prophecies was a provocative one and one that's quite interesting. I've just been to a watershed debate about the idea of maybe forgetting certain aspects of history. What is, if you think of Bosnia and the way that, old hatreds and tensions are resurrected in negative ways, that there is perhaps, it isn't just a unsullied or unproblematic given to sort of remember everything, but on the other hand, do we censor history? Do we not embrace the difficulties? So I think these are not, there's no right or wrong answer in some respects, but it's something that we need to be aware of, that there are nuanced aspects of both the demands of history as an academic discipline, its relationship to the public arena, and the way that it relates to memory. It's not a straightforward relationship, but it's one I think that's been really creatively and interestingly explored. And I thought Nicola's story about Sarah Parker Redmond had the real virtues of showing that when you had a specific narrative that you use the archive, and that's something that came across in Roz's work too, the richness that archival research can bring to dig around in those in very different ways, because Nicola's more of a conventional historian. Roz is approaching it as both as a personal, exploration and as a playwright. I thought, but in both cases, looking at the archives and going beyond what you can get on the internet and actually going in and finding out, things that you've dug up in the archives, so important and so enriching. So I thought that was marvelous. The work that, Crystal and is it, sorry? Louisa, sorry, I can't read my own handwriting, Louisa, so forgive me. Did on the Black GIs was great and reminded me a lot of the work that Graham Smith and some of the Bristol stuff has. And I think we need to marry this up because, one of the big things that's actually informing our contemporary political debate right now in the mayoral race in Bristol with Marvin Rees as the Labour candidate was the whole question of mixedness. Fastest growing group of mix, is racially mixed. And I think that whole, the kind of suffering that went on with the offspring of the Black GIs and the white working class women is something that really needs to be explored. And it kind of problematizes the fact that although the English people in the rural areas were very welcoming compared to white American soldiers to the Black GIs, it wasn't the very stigma that these women faced having brown babies does show that things were more complicated than that, and that there were different legacies within the rural popular culture. Now, I hope to goodness I haven't left anybody out in my précis, but I suppose who have I left out? I haven't. I think I've covered everybody, have I? Yes, yeah, right.
You've got it there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Right.
Have a look at
Sorry.
that. Yeah.
It's So I did talk about Sean, and I think I've got just about. I think I've mentioned everyone, but I suppose just to summarize, some of the main tensions are this tension between the demands of history as an academic discipline and doing the archival research, balancing the contradictory views, thinking about truth values. Do we throw out the Enlightenment baby with the postmodernist bathwater? I mean, is there something that, did things really happen, or is it all a matter of complete interpretation? I mean, I think these are very, very live issues. And then the function of history in the public arena and the tension between the academic discipline and the public, and also the therapeutic and restorative and creative uses of history and its interaction with artists. This is what I find so exciting. Artists and music and playwrights and sculptors. I think this is the way forward to bring history and make it more relevant to a whole generation that is now accessing their knowledge in such different ways. So I think this is a really important kind of conference, and I'll leave it there and open it up to my panel to comment. Thank you.
Shall I start?
Yes, please,
Okay. So thank you very much. I mean, my name's I'm Catherine Fletcher, and I work at Swansea University, and I have recently finished this book, which is out in 2 weeks, The Black Prince of Florence, which is a biography of Alessandro de' Medici, who ruled Florence for 5.5 years in the 1530s, and who was by tradition the illegitimate son of an African slave. And that is a story, and I use the word story advisedly, that I explore in some detail in the book. Now, it's been really interesting to me here in light of my experience over the past few years working on that research project, to hear the papers today. I think particularly in the light of this idea of the relationship of past and present, and the idea that Madge has already mentioned of ways that we make and remake history for our own times. So whether history can be a form of therapy, whether it can be a form of inspiration. And what this means to me as a professional academic historian who has had a training in drawing that line and always being conscious of that line between fact and fiction and how one navigates it. Now, I think historians, of course, work in our own time, in the present, and we write with our present preoccupations and mentalities. And we also do creative things with our sources, but we have a set of parameters to work with. And I think for historians, one of the things that we often learn and discuss is this idea that the past may be the source of inspiration for the present, but it's also a foreign country where they do things differently. And so I'm interested in this tension between, on the one hand, human universals that we can get from the past, but also exploring the process of change over time. And change over time was really important for me in writing the biography of somebody who lived nearly 500 years ago, because I, with this book, was writing about somebody who was, in his afterlife, racialized, but who actually lived in a period where the modern concepts of race were only just starting to come into being. And it was a real challenge for me, one, to try and communicate that chronology of the concept of black to a reader who perhaps wouldn't have thought about that before, but also to try and imagine myself into a society where people weren't put into racial boxes. And I have to say, I realised in the course of writing the book just how much I sort of subconsciously did that in my own life as I went through. So it's sort of a personal challenge to me. I also had to work through a lot of racist histories that had been written of Alessandro de' Medici in different times, and to try and work out what I could take from these histories, which were written in the late 19th or 20th centuries, that might be based on perfectly good archive research, and what was those historians trying to put their particular spin on that bit of the past. And a lot of the time, because the original archive sources have been destroyed, I was always sort of navigating my way through saying, here's a story about Alessandro, here's a tale about Alessandro, here is what I have got from an archive document, and trying to differentiate those things for the reader. So doing that boundary between fact and fiction. And my final point, because I don't want to take up too much time in this discussion, is about the question of heroes that Naya and Hannah raised in their discussion. Because, I mean, you can say a lot of things about Alessandro de' Medici, but he certainly was not Mr. Nice Guy. And I think that he's effectively a dictator of a state. He makes himself his prince. He does that with the support of his very powerful family in a lot of quite unscrupulous ways. He almost certainly has opponents murdered. Where is the place for the bad guys in this history? Do they have one? If so, how do we navigate that?
Thank you. Norma.
Thank you. I just really wanted to summarise and just say I've had a fantastic day. It's been really enlightening. I've learned lots of new things. I really enjoyed the latter half as it was about local histories. I do a lot of work in the local community in Nottingham, so I know what it is to work. To live with history and to work with it and create it, because I think that's where it starts. It starts in the community. It starts with people spending their time going out, engaging with young people, engaging with older people, engaging with people who've had difficult or challenging experiences and helping to record, and not leaving it solely to academics to write our history. I don't believe in it at all. I believe, the history's got to start with the people, and the academics got to listen to the people and work with ordinary people to address how stories are told. As an ex-teacher, I know that it's difficult to... I left teaching. I was so stressed out with my frustrations with the curriculum and English, what I was having to tell students, how I was being monitored as a black female teacher. And it is a challenge, but we've got to work at that and address the curriculum. People blame history teachers for not teaching the right information, but it's very hard. It's very hard for a history teacher to present the world's history in like 50 minutes that they have, or an hour. So I think it's our job, as all of us here are passionate historians, for us to engage in some way on different levels, whether it's high-level politics or in the local community, to bring up some of the issues that have come up today and interesting histories that have come up today. It's all for sharing. I very much believe in that.
Thank you. Kwaku.
There is a saying that politics is too important a subject to be left to politicians. And the reason why I'm sitting here is that I believe that history is too important to be left to historians. And if an Oxford professor in Africana has got something, I think the New York Times, and it's still up there, saying that the Bristol bus boycott was because our workers want more pay or something, and not understanding that it was Africans or non-Europeans trying to make sure that they worked as drivers and bus conductors. We in the community have got to engage with history and not leave it to people. I'm not denigrating historians. You've got to study, and I haven't done that, and pour over somebody about primary resources and such. But nevertheless, we as consumers of history must engage with it more than just leaving it to our so-called historians. That's why I'm here. The lady over there, Michael's partner, asked me, what do I do? And I said, observer. And though I do put observer, in fact, on these evaluation forms, because who am I? At best, I sometimes describe myself as music industry and history consultant, because I'm not a historian. Madge and people like David are the historians, because you spend time studying formally. Anyway, having said that, I just want to say something. The lottery fund was mentioned. With the small organizations, and we've had 2 small heritage lottery funds, because in observing the area I lived in, Brent, I saw how things were changing. I always tell my wife, oh, this used to be a record shop. This used to be the biggest independent record company in the world. And so why don't you do something about this? So she forced me. We did something called Brent Black Music History Project. We did a booklet and a DVD. Secondly, we got another heritage fund to do something called NAM, naming and role models. And for the people in Bristol, I think you're talking about names and stuff. We've got that resource. But then, as much as funding is important, sometimes we shouldn't wait for funding. I had an idea to do a document looking at British African history. And had I waited for funding, I wouldn't have had Tony Ben or Jessica Jessica Huntley, because they died soon after I did the project. So we've got to capture our histories when we can, with or without funding. Great. Okay. Now, what have I learned from today's, because I'm a believer in long life learning. And I'll say I have learned a few things. I think Ross probably, I don't know if she's still there, misunderstood the point I made. If out of context, I saw an actor called Orlando Martins, I probably initially wouldn't have been interested because I don't have seen him as an African. Not that Africans should all be interested in African at first, but I don't have related to him being African. And I think the chair on that panel understood what I'm saying. So names sometimes disempower from getting the information we want if we're trying to look at African history. By the way, I don't talk about black history, I talk about African history. Okay. Then someone called, by the way, you corrected, he died in 1985. I think we got the wrong date on there. And then Sarah Parker, is it Raymond? Instead of Raymond, so I don't think it has a D there. Again, on face value.
Sorry, Kwaku, that's probably me.
Yeah, okay, not to worry. Yeah, I think errata is always important, so we should always update information if we've got it wrong, so we can learn from that. Yeah, again, just name alone wouldn't have picked up on this. So I'm glad you brought this to my information. I've made notes, I'm going to learn a bit more. Bonetta Forbes, obviously, she's become well-known, and the portrait is well-known, so we can't see as that. Now, the latest I did the GI, as I said, it's a bit periphery to what I do, but nevertheless, I've learned something because my take on the engagement with the GIs in Britain was that, because we've not enshrined racist laws in Britain, the idea was that, we don't deal with racism, we're cool about it. Although I did say we've had color bar going back decades. But I was surprised from your presentation to learn that the British government pretty much gave the Americans a carte blanche and then acted a law, as you said, called Visiting Forces Act. So I'm going to find out a little bit about that. I think that's disgraceful. We're not masters of our own land. Having said that, I hear that the Americans control Trident, saying, well, you can't fire the Trident without having the Americans' permission. So maybe, I shouldn't be surprised that such a law was enacted just to facilitate Americans' color bar or Jim Crow laws, which is just disgraceful. I think that's my take on today. Thanks to Michael and Miranda. Lastly, because if you've been reading the blogs that's been going around, Radio 4, they Making History had a program saying, where are the black historians? And I've got to tell you something particular, I think, Miranda. My wife is African from Ghana. And we're saying that, I heard the word agency. We must be the agency of our history. I don't think Europeans cannot talk about African history, no. But often, the gatekeepers find it easy to have European specialists on history. So I think she had some engagement with you on that issue, that where are the Africans in terms of your programs? I've seen a majority African panel today, so I'm going to take that back to her. But I think we have to have a discourse on where are the black historians, because they are there from academia to community level. I work on a community level. There's a whole lot of stuff, and sometimes I think that disconnect between academia and community probably needs to be bridged, because if you want people in academia, they have to start engaging with history, not in the formal institutions, but from local things that people are doing, and that will then they'll gravitate towards academia. I think I'm done. Thank you very much.
Before we go on to Miranda and Michael, I just want to say, I have to say that I think the interaction, I think academic historians do have something, well, I would say this, wouldn't I? Do have something to offer in the sense of a kind of a methodology and familiarity with sources and looking, but we often don't ask the right questions, and we often don't have the breadth of vision and the breadth of concern, and that's where, and I so agree with you about not waiting for the funding. If I had waited for the funding, black and white and the buses never would have gotten written, but I think what we need is community historians and people with a passion have so much to offer in extending the range of historical investigation. But I think it's an interaction between the two, and I don't think we should denigrate each other. We each come with different strengths.
Okay.
Anyways, that's my bit.
Yeah. So I think I quite like to tweet the producer of the Radio 4 Making History and say, where are all the black historians? Well, a lot of them were here today.
Yes.
And every time we have one of these events, I meet somebody new who's done some amazing research that no one's ever heard of, and it's all there. And it's really exciting to see everybody coming together and meeting each other. But inevitably, it's not always exactly the same people. This is a good thing and a bad thing, because they don't always meet each other, and sometimes you hear these great stories and then you can't kind of capture them. And so that's partly on our website, blackbritishhistory.co.uk, which you can find a link to through the Twitter. One of the sort of nascent projects on that is to create this directory of Black British history experts. And I would really urge any of you who are expert, even in a very, very small part of Black British history, like, about one person, put yourself up on there. There isn't I don't think there's extreme quality control there. Anyway, we want, we want that to be a place where, next time some silly journalist wants to find someone who knows something, they could go there, they could find lots of expertise, in our directory. Would be one kind of way of bringing these people to wider public prominence. So that's sort of one of the sort of ongoing projects, I think. And I think the other thing to say is that I've sort of just echo what Madge and Kwaku was saying, the importance of collaboration. We all want the same thing here, I think, and it's just about working together to make that happen. And I'm always really inspired at these events where there's always, I always find examples of people working together. Sometimes they come from more or less academic backgrounds, or they're doing different things, but they've found each other. Like I found Michael. They found each other, and they're collaborating now to bring different perspectives and strengths towards the greater goal of researching and disseminating Black British history. So, also, we always, as like you were saying, you always learn something new, and it's really exciting. So, I have so many things I could say, but I just want to sort of focus on one point. I thought I knew everything there was to know about John Blank, but in Michael's paper, I had I learned something new, which was quite sort of disturbing, which was that when you went into schools and prisons and said, draw John Blank, half of these people started drawing him in chains, which I find really, really disturbing, but I think it really touches on some of the issues we've been talking about today, are these kind of preconceptions, our own modern ideas, the people you were talking about, how so many people think that their history started, you were saying when we came to Britain as slaves, or when we were slaves, as if that is the sort of beginning, end, and total content of Black history. And again, this is something we're really kind of working to disprove. And that's also my own work, which is into Africans in the Tudor period. I'm writing a book called Black Tudors, which hopefully will be out next year. First chapter, all about John Blank. But there are many more. And I think this is, in that area, I have the same issue, that whenever I start trying to talk to people about my subject, people quite often just assume that these people were enslaved here. And that, I've done the research, I've looked at the archives, and this actually was not the case at all. There was no legal framework of enslavement at that time at all, and yet we're still grappling with this mental block of the huge impact of what did happen, of the transatlantic slave trade and its horrible trauma and impact is still all in all of our minds when we think about this past. And so, my work is part of that work of kind of trying to roll that boulder to one side and get at something different. So,
thanks, Miranda.
On to Michael.
I'm tempted to say, how do I follow that? Look, I'm going to speak here from the heart. I found a really exciting day, a very fulfilling day, but there's been two standout presentations to me which sum up why I get involved with what's happening in Black British history. One was Heather's presentation. Even now I get choked when I think about it. Here was an artist, a historian, a practitioner being honest about herself and identity.
Yes, absolutely. Because
it's challenging sometimes to be black, because there's so much negativity. But to stand up and use the archives to manage that, really. So if we can take that message out, that's really what it's all about. The second was Naya and Hannah when they talked about identity. Because that to me is what really is at the heart of this for me. It's about identity. And my vision is, this is there are people coming out of care, young children out of care, 15, 16-year-olds, who've never had a bedtime story told them. There are black kids within that cohort who have no cognizance of their history, and they take all the negativity and the mental health issues and the problems of getting jobs, keeping houses, paying rent. So if we can teach them a history that gives them some sense of identity of who they are, how they fit into society, that they have a part to play, they're part of the society. That to me is what this is all about. And those two presentations, Heather's and Hannah and Naya's, really spoke to what that's about. All the other things are really part of it. The stories that they feed into that. But that's the kernel and nucleus of what I'm about. Okay.
Well, thank you all for coming.
No, hang on a second. Now some housekeeping. Yes, thank you for that. Okay, first, I love all the people saying Michael and Miranda, or Miranda and Michael, but Philip is here, Philip Murphy and the Institute of Commonwealth Studies. Yes, we would not be here if Philip didn't deliver on that idea, honestly. So I thank Philip and the Institute of Commonwealth Studies. Yeah? Got to. The second thing is, did you notice the panel before? There was a lone guy here. There was all those women. This has been extraordinary. There's only been 2 male speakers all day. It's outrageous. No, seriously. We were criticised. Where are the women? Where are the women histories? So we've tried several times, and we think it's a success. I'd like to say we planned it. Didn't we? Yeah, we planned it. It was great to see that. Great to see that, all the women here. And the last thing, your assessment form. In your pack, there's an assessment form. Now, I'm going to say this really heavily now. This is all about funding. We need your feedback because we're going to take this further. And the positivity, the more no, I'm not going to put words into your mouth. Your views matter to help us move this forward. So please fill that in before you leave. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody, for your input. We don't have to rush away. Unfortunately, there's not free drinks, but there is besides the evaluation form, if there's anything else that people would like to say. I mean, the one thing I would like to say is I think we've made great strides today, but what we really need to do, and certainly what the academic institutions need to do, is to forge much better organic links with the communities in which we live. And I think that there are whole constituencies of people who would have been interested here. It isn't always conspiracy, it's often cock-up in the sense that we don't know how to locate the networks of people who might be interested in coming. And we need your help, particularly those of you with local expertise. We really need your help in getting the contacts and the networking so that we can circulate for the next conference, the next workshop, and make this even more inclusive than it is today. So that's what I would like to say. The other thing that was raised in the discussion was the connection between refugee, the whole sort of migration, refugee, and migrant crisis, and Black history, the overlap, and I think in the way that we can reach out to each other is something that was raised. That's really important too. Okay, well, thank you very much. I want to thank Watershed, and particularly James for his technical assistant, and for everyone who did the catering and everything. And to Olga Jimenez, who helped administer and organize us. So thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Madge, for chairing this final session.
And the University
of the West of England for hosting us here in Bristol. We're hoping to have our What's Happening in Black British History 5 later this year in London, probably in the autumn, October, November time. But watch this space, stay in touch. If you're not on one of our mailing lists, then tell us, and we'll add you and spread the word. And thanks for coming.
Thank you.